the narrow plain of Marathon in eastern Greece, a battle rages that will alter the course of Western civilization. On one side, the army of the Persian Empire, the most powerful fighting force in the world. On the other side, the army of Athens, half its size, led by the famed Greek general Miltiades. This is a battle of military brilliance in the face of overwhelming odds. A battle for the future of Greece and for the supremacy of the ancient world. Two civilizations are about to collide. East meets West on the plains of Marathon. Death comes swiftly. For 6 days, a brutal attack by a faceless invader stains the soil red. Those not butchered are enslaved. The aggressors are the heavy infantry of the mighty Persian Empire. They are called immortals. The victims are residents of the island of Euboea in the Greek city of Eretria. 600 Persian warships had set sail on the Aegean Sea and swallowed every Greek island in their path. But Euboea is not their final destination. They're heading to Athens. 5-year-old commander, Alexander the Great. It's his time now.
Alexander has this kind of larger-than-life aura about him. He's handsome with a muscular build, and he's extremely charismatic. His troops pretty much worship him.
In less than 5 years, he had managed to carry out a major strategic plan from Greece to invade Persia and destroy the Persian Empire. In 5 years, he managed to suppress his own domestic opposition, and then finally was able to force a cataclysmic battle in modern-day Iraq on the plains of Arbela, where he destroyed the last remaining Persian army, and then by right of conquest became emperor of all of Persia.
Some say Alexander's pedigree destined him for greatness. They believed he's a descendant of Hercules on his father's side and Achilles on his mother's. Alexander's empire now stretches from Greece to Egypt to modern-day Afghanistan, one of the largest in the history of the world. But Alexander's appetite for power and glory is insatiable. 5 years after he defeats the Persians, Alexander is ready to take on a new opponent. He stands with his 32,000 battle-tested soldiers along the banks of the
Ionia, down to Athens, Corinth, Sparta, all those states whose names pop up in history. Each city-state was a self-contained society, had its own lands, its own army. But aboard his warship, the Persian commander Datis cares about only one of these city-states, Athens. He's so confident he'll be able to destroy this historic city, the only question in his mind is exactly how he'll destroy it. He can either attack Athens directly from the sea, is one possibility. This is a bit difficult. Athens is walled, and an amphibious assault from the sea against opposition is pretty iffy business. So he decides not to attack Athens head-on, rather to pick a spot about 25 miles away from the city along his line of route, and to land there and figure one of two things would happen.
Either the Greek army responds and comes out to meet him, or he would land, assemble his army, and simply march on to Athens from the ground. So given the choice between the land campaign or an amphibious landing of Athens itself, he chooses the land campaign.
Datis directs his fleet of 600 ships about 26 miles away from Athens, at Marathon. He moors his ships in Marathon Bay and disembarks on the skinniest beach. The Persians then make camp on the northeast side of the plain, next to the Great Marsh.
The Persian army is about to slam into Athens like a Category 5 hurricane. The Athenians know surrender isn't an option, but they're divided on how to prepare. Should they hunker down behind the city walls or march out to meet the Persians in battle?
Some in Athens believe that an open field battle against the Persians is suicide. But one Athenian disagrees. His name is Miltiades, and he has a personal history with the Persians.
Miltiades is a very interesting character. He comes from a prominent family in Athens, and when he's about 35, he takes over a Greek colony in Ionia, on the edge of the Persian Empire. He rules there as a tyrant. This makes him very unpopular in Athens.
In the late 6th century BC, Miltiades' home on the Hellespont Peninsula is engulfed by the expanding Persian Empire. He's forced into military service. Now wielding a Persian sword, he must fight along his conquerors. The Persians soon spread north, cross the Danube River, and invade Scythia, modern-day Eastern Europe and Asia.
Miltiades was in charge of guarding the bridges across the Danube over which the Persian army had come in order to go into Scythia and prosecute the campaign.
Finally, after 3 long years in Scythia, Miltiades decided he'd had enough.
Miltiades had never been a big fan of the Persians, and he tried to get other Greek generals to agree that what we ought to do is burn the bridges behind Darius and his army and let them die of starvation or be killed by the Scythians. Other Greeks would not go along with it, but it was Miltiades' idea, and it was picked up by Persian intelligence. So Persian intelligence were not very happy with Miltiades, as you might expect.
Miltiades flees to Athens, but he's not welcome there either. The people of Athens still remember Miltiades as a tyrant and lock him up at the first chance they get.
3 years after his arrival in Athens, Miltiades faces the death sentence for tyranny, but he's got an ace in the hole. He knows the Persian game.
And the Persians are on their way, looking to destroy Athens.
The Athenians not only spare Miltiades' life, they make him a general. But Miltiades has to wonder which fate is worse, execution or being hacked to little bitty bits by the Persian warriors.
Miltiades chooses to face the Persian blade, and rather than hide behind the walls of Athens, he wants to meet the Persians on the battlefield.
But the final decision on whether to fight is not his to make. Athenian democracy extends to the army too. So when an argument erupts over what to do at Marathon, the Council of 10 generals must decide what to do. Attack now, or retreat and try to get help from other Greek city-states.
The vote is 5-5. The tie-breaking vote falls to a man named Callimachus. He is the polemarch. It's a ceremonial position in the Athenian army. Miltiades makes an impassioned case to Callimachus, saying, "It's up to you whether Athens is reduced to slavery or rises to become the greatest of all the Greek city-states." He explains that failure to fight now will shatter the democracy along factional lines and make them easy prey for the Persians. Callimachus is convinced, and he votes to attack.
Miltiades gets his war. He leads the entire Athenian army, roughly 10,000 strong, 26 miles east to the plains of Marathon. The odds are overwhelmingly against Miltiades. The Persian force is colossal. More than twice the Athenian size. 20,000 infantry, 3,000 archers, 2,000 cavalry.
Miltiades takes a look at the situation and realizes immediately he's severely outnumbered. He's not only outnumbered, he's outgunned in the sense that there are fairly substantial archer and cavalry contingents.
Even if the Athenians can hold back the Persian infantry, they have no way to counter the Persian war horses. It's a massive mismatch.
Cavalry is one of the keys to Persian military success. They were one of the first armies to fully integrate horses and heavy infantry for a devastating 1-2 punch, and funnel their enemies into the chomping jaws of their main infantry lines.
Miltiades is outnumbered and outgunned. The Athenians have never faced a force like this before. But they have cut their teeth on some of the greatest warriors of the ancient world. For centuries, these two Greek city-states shed each other's blood. But 50 years before Miltiades faces the Persians, a conflict erupts between the Greek neighbors that will ultimately lead to the Battle of Marathon. It's 540 BC, 50 years before the Battle of Marathon. Two Greek city-states, Athens and Sparta, attack each other on the open battlefield.
The rivalry between Athens and Sparta is kind of like Michigan versus Ohio State, except with spears. They constantly seek any advantage they can over one another. While most of their battles are, provincial squabbles, one of them gets the Persians involved and eventually leads to the Battle of Marathon.
Athens is known as the birthplace of democracy. Sparta, their neighbor to the west, couldn't be more different.
Imagine that the U.S. Marines had their own country. That's Sparta. They train constantly, weapons, tactics, armor. It's pretty much all they do. Now, the Athenian-Spartan relationship is very bipolar. Sometimes they help each other, sometimes they fight.
At the time, Athens is ruled by a man named Hippias. He is, however, wildly unpopular with the Athenian aristocrats. So they plot a coup and overthrow Hippias with the help of some unlikely allies, the Spartans.
Now, the problem with the Spartans helping you is that they wouldn't go home. And that was the problem that the Athenians had, was how to get rid of the Spartans. Well, they rose in revolt and drove the Spartans out of Athens. It was that period about 540 BC, which was the beginning of Athenian democracy at about this time. The problem was this. Inevitably, one would expect the Spartans to counterattack.
Athens believes they need an ally to defend themselves against Sparta. They turn to the Persian Empire.
So that's one of the first examples in Greek history of a smaller state trying to ally itself with a larger state, in this case the Persian Empire, in order to protect itself from aggression of another state, in this case Sparta.
Athens sends an envoy to the Persian province of Ionia, now modern-day Turkey. At the court of the Persian governor, the envoy asks for Persia's help against Sparta. The Persian governor agrees, but on one condition. The Athenians must make a sacred offer of earth and water.
The trouble is, the Athenians don't really understand what the offer of earth and water means. They think they're signing a treaty, just like the treaties they've made in the past with other Greek city-states. But to the Persians, accepting earth and water means they own Athens. It has become their colony.
Without understanding what they're really doing, the envoys submit to Persian rule. All of Athens will pay dearly for this mistake.
It made no sense to the rational Greeks. I mean, these are the people who invented logic, mathematics, and philosophy. For them, it was just a silly little ritual that really meant nothing.
Now, the problem then is the same problem now. When you have two cultures reaching an agreement, sometimes that agreement means different things to each party because the cultural context in which it occurs is different.
Athens secures the promise of Persian protection, but Sparta attacks so quickly Athens has no time to call on her new ally.
Determined to keep their new democracy, Athenians fight more ferociously than ever. They defeat the Spartan invasion on their own. Now, this is important because Athens had asked the Persians for help, but they don't need it. They defeated Sparta all by themselves.
The Athenians now felt that the agreement they had made with the Persians was null and void, and made the terrible mistake of telling the Persians that.
This infuriates the Persian emperor, Darius I.
It amounted, in the Persian view, to little more than an open revolt, and Darius resolved that he was going to bring Athens to heel.
The Persians send heralds to Athens and demand payment of customary taxes. The Athenians throw them into a pit to die. Athens has spit in the face of the world's most powerful empire.
Throughout history, alliances often come with unintended consequences, but few have the magnitude of the treaty between Athens and Persia. If the Athenians never asked for Persian help against the Spartans, the world might be a completely different place today. It sets off centuries of conflict between the East and the West.
And the first major battle is Marathon, where more than 20,000 Persian infantry, cavalry, and archers are preparing to burn Athens to the ground. The Athenian general Miltiades and 10,000 Greek infantrymen are colossally overmatched. But Miltiades does have one advantage.
How does he offset the inferiorities that he suffers relative to the Persian forces? And the answer, as almost always in antiquity, is the same. Terrain, terrain, terrain. Location, location, location.
Historians debate the exact route the Persians would have taken to get from Marathon to Athens. Some believe they would have taken the coastal road, a route that passes through the Vrexiza swamp.
But then you would have had to go through a swamp, which was doable. But then you would have been a problem where the Persian army would have been in column of march, trying to gain the road with the Athenian army on its flank. Always a bad idea.
The only other way to Athens is through the mountains, beginning at the Vrana Valley.
If the Persian army intends to invade Athens, it's got to go through the mouth of that valley. And it's not very wide. It's not very wide. So what Miltiades does, he decides to block the valley. And he deploys his troops in the mouth of the Vrana Valley in order to make it impossible for the Persians to advance further.
Miltiades has positioned his infantry in the valley like a cork in a bottle. The Athenian phalanx is made up of lines of tightly organized, interlocking warriors. They can move forward and back easily, but not side to side.
The phalanx formation is incredibly effective at holding ground and moving forward. With rows of men packed tightly together, they use each other's overlapping shields to form an armored wall.
Miltiades anchors his flanks on the rocky sides of the hill and then goes about chopping down trees to put them on the flanks as well. Why does he do this? He's well aware of the fact that the weakness of the Greek phalanx is its flanks. Whenever it has died in battle, it has died because it's been taken in the flanks, either by another phalanx or mostly by cavalry.
In the valley, the flanks of the phalanx are well protected.
So you're not going to rely on the steepness and the rocks alone. You pile it with brush and trees and logs so that there can't be any cavalry attack. So just by positioning his troops where he has essentially taken the cavalry out of the fight. Brilliant maneuver.
The Persian commander Datis is not concerned and assembles his infantry. For 3 days, the Persians line up for battle. But the Greeks choose not to engage them and stay in their protective zone.
It wins the day if there's no fight at all. Its job essentially is to protect Athens by blocking the road. So if you would like to stay here for several weeks, that was quite okay with Miltiades. It's not okay, of course, with the Persians.
Finally, the frustrated Persians initiate an attack. The Athenians form up for battle. But the Persians do not immediately send in their infantry. They first launch a blistering barrage of arrow fire. Under a tidal wave of missiles, there is nowhere for the Athenians to hide. (490 BC). It's the Athenian Greeks versus the mighty Persians on the plains of Marathon. The Persians draw first with a devastating arrow attack.
Imagine this wall of missiles literally blocking out the sun, raining down on the Athenians. But you know what? The Athenians brushed the arrow fire away like annoying gnats.
Thousands of Persian arrows, very few Athenian casualties. And despite being outnumbered 2-1, the Athenians, led by General Miltiades, taunt the Persians. The Persians are on a mission. Break through the wall of Greek soldiers, march to Athens, and burn the city to the ground.
Exactly what happens next is up for debate. Every historian has his theory of what went down at Marathon and why. And that's because we only have one real source, the Greek historian Herodotus.
The problem is that Herodotus is more like the world's first blogger than an objective historian. He blends events, myths, anecdotes, hearsay into this great story, but nobody in their right mind believes it's all true. So who attacked who first at Marathon and why? Well, from the Athenian position, there's no need to attack anyone.
But Datis, the Persian commander, is itching for a fight. After the failed missile attack, there's only one thing for him to do.
All that's left is a frontal assault. You're going to have to mix it up head-on, one-on-one.
10,000 Persian light infantrymen charge across the Marathon plain. Waiting for them is the Athenian phalanx, a bronze wall of spears and shields. More than 1 million pounds of flesh and bone collide. Helping the Athenians create this wall is the hoplon shield.
The Greek shield, known as the hoplon, is more than just a glorified garbage can lid. It's a revolutionary innovation in warfare.
The hoplon is a large, circular, bowl-shaped shield made of wood and faced with bronze. It can withstand arrows and punishing sword blows without splintering. But what makes it truly remarkable is what's called an Argive grip. The soldier passes his arm through a leather loop in the middle of the shield and holds onto a handle near the rim.
And why this is important is it gives you very good control, much more force with the shield, whereas the old tether grip in the center wouldn't allow you to produce a lot of force with it.
The Athenians stop the crushing charge. Now they go on the offensive. The Athenians' primary weapon is the heavy ashwood spear called the dory. 7 feet long, tipped with sharpened iron, the dory can smash through shields and armor. This spear is not thrown. It's used to stab the enemy with a gruesome thrust. In the 6th century BC, most Athenian warriors wear lightweight lamellar armor, made of bonded strips of linen and leather. Some, however, wear heavy, rigid cuirasses, bronze plates sculpted to look like a muscular torso. Bronze helmets with distinctive horsehair plumes protect their heads, while greaves protect their lower legs. In full battle gear, the hoplites are armored head to toe.
Problem for the Persians at Marathon is they're up against a determined Athenian phalanx that doesn't scatter during the arrow barrage. The Persian light infantry also doesn't have their usual cavalry support. So it's just sickle swords and wicker shields against a bronze wall of Athenians.
The Persian commander Datis sends in wave after wave of light infantry assaults. Each time, however, they impale themselves on the solid Athenian wall of spears. The Persians are unrelenting. Defeat is not an option.
The issue of imperial prestige is at stake. I mean, what in all hell's name could possibly have motivated this pipsqueak of a nation, this backwater, to insult the largest empire on earth?
For the Persians, Marathon is about more than just a broken treaty. It's also punishment for Athens' support of a revolution against Persia 10 years earlier in nearby Ionia. Once an Athenian Greek colony, Ionia was absorbed as a province by the Persian Empire in 540 BC. But 40 years later, in 500 BC, a local tyrant incited a revolution. The people of Ionia then asked Athens for help.
Athens was seen by her colonies as the kind of the mother country. And my guess, Athens considered herself the mother country. And so when her colonies asked for help, she sent troops. It was a mistake of the first order, to be sure, but that's probably what motivated. Certainly could not possibly be justified on the grounds of rational self-interest.
The Athenians were joined by a force from Eretria in nearby Euboea. They sailed across the Aegean to Ionia and stormed the capital of Sardis. It is another Athenian slap in the face the Persians will never forget. 500 BC, 10 years before the Battle of Marathon, the Ionian Revolt has begun. Several Greek contingents, including Athenians, attacked Persian-controlled Sardis, the Ionian capital, and burned the city to the ground. To make matters worse for Persia, at the same time they are fighting wars in India, Egypt, and Scythia.
The Ionian rebels score a major blow, but the victory is short-lived. The Persians increase their force levels and begin to suppress the Ionian Revolt.
The Athenians, knowing that discussion was the better part of valor, went home, as did the Euboeans. And the Ionian Revolt simmered on and off for the next 5 years until it finally simmered out. It flared out, and Persia recaptured the Ionian coast.
But the Persian King Darius is furious. He vows vengeance.
Darius calls upon his god to grant him vengeance against the Athenians. He even makes a servant come up to him 3 times every night during dinner and whisper in his ear, "Sire, remember the Athenians." So even while he's dealing with Egypt and wars in India and Scythia, Athenian payback is always on his mind.
King Darius attempts to exact revenge on the Athenians in 490 BC at Marathon. But so far, the Athenians have survived a massive Persian missile attack. And now they are holding fast against the Persian light infantry. General Miltiades has brilliantly positioned his defensive force. The Greek heavy infantry phalanxes are jammed in a narrow opening between the mountains, blocking the path to Athens.
The Persians had chosen the battlefield, okay, by landing at Marathon, but the Athenians had chosen the terrain by using it to maximum advantage. And it's an old trick.
But an effective one, as the Persian light infantry doesn't even dent the Athenian wall.
Persian light infantry retreats. But now, Miltiades must face the elite force of the Persian army, the heavy infantry, the Immortals.
The legendary Immortals are the stormtroopers of the Persian Empire. Faceless, they march into battle in complete silence. They are the Athenians' worst nightmare. In addition to their brutal killing ability, the presence of the Immortals forces Miltiades to change his tactics.
Miltiades, although he has prepared the battlefield expertly and to give him every advantage, still suffers from a great disadvantage. And that is the area in which he occupies, although it's relatively narrow, okay, is still wider than he has sufficient troops to cover. What he does is he weakens his center and moves the additional troops out. So that when you look at the deployment of the Athenian force, you're looking at a force that is relatively thin in the center, but has heavy phalanxes on either side.
Weakening the center of his phalanx is a huge gamble. But then Miltiades rolls the dice again. He advances his line out of the protective valley.
If he stays where he is, he knows that when the center gets hit, it's going to flex in. The problem when it flexes in, if he stays where he is there's not enough room for his heavy phalanxes on the end to maneuver inward. There's not enough room. They're jammed up against the terrain. So he has a very, very delicate tactical problem, and it's this.
Miltiades must move his troops far enough to be able to extend his line so the phalanxes can maneuver.
The trick is, how far can Miltiades move out from the valley? If he doesn't come out far enough, his flanks can't maneuver. If he comes out too far, the Persians can get around his flanks and surround him. And remember, all this is happening on the fly. Miltiades won't know how far is too far until it happens.
The Immortals close in. Miltiades needs to make his move. He orders his troops to redeploy.
Herodotus tells us that Marathon is the first time the Greek hoplites ever ran into battle. And the reason they'd never done it before is that it's exhausting. The Greeks wear all this heavy armor and carry long spears. So running just wastes a lot of energy.
The other problem with running is the tight phalanx formation itself. Their strength lies in their unit cohesion. If that breaks apart as they advance, they're immediately vulnerable.
My guess is that Herodotus is describing a redeployment at the run, not a movement to contact at the run. At a given signal, everybody moved as close to format as they could, moved out to 200 yards, stopped, and then reformed very quickly, so that by the time actual contact occurred with the Persians, okay, the units were once more disciplined, ranks were dressed, ready to receive the charge.
While historians debate many aspects of the Battle of Marathon, most agree about what happens next, an apocalypse of violence. The armies collide in a horrifying maelstrom of bronze and blood. The battle is so intense that some Greeks report crazed visions of ghost warriors who crash through the lines and cut down men at random. But the reality is just as terrifying. The Persians surge forward and the Athenians are beaten back.
The weak center can't withstand the Persian attack. It's about to break. It's getting pushed back, back, back towards the valley. The hoplite dam is about to burst, and it looks like Athens is doomed.
Miltiades' center is on the brink of collapse, but at the flanks, it's a different story.
The normal tactics for the Persian infantry would have been to put the strongest units in the middle and the weaker units on the wings.
This is because the wings are usually supported by cavalry. Now Miltiades would know this, and it may be why he bolsters his own forces on the flanks.
With the Persian cavalry rendered ineffective by the terrain, the Athenians are able to chop down the weakened Persian flanks. The center of the Athenian line continues to be pushed back, while the flanks hold strong.
And Herodotus tells us that just before the center broke, they were rallied by their officers to find new courage and actually counterattacked. They counterattacked enough to stop the forward movement in the center. And at that point, the heavy phalanxes on the wings, bang, closed in on the side. Took them in the flanks, literally had them in the V, and literally slaughtered them.
In a daring stroke of military brilliance, Miltiades has completely turned the tables on the Persians. The Battle of Marathon has become a Persian bloodbath. While keeping his flanks anchored, the Athenian general Miltiades has pulled the center of his line back, drawing the Persian infantry into a death trap. Hemmed in on three sides, the Persians can't maneuver. They panic.
One of the reasons for their panic probably was something caused by the fog of war, and by something that happens to men in battle no matter how well they are trained or how well you are disciplined. Every now and again, the disease of fear gets into your soul. And when that happens, and panic gets into your ranks, it's done. You can't stop it, no matter how disciplined you are, how controlled you are.
More than 6,000 Persians perish, while the Athenians lose fewer than 200. Among the Athenian dead, however, is Callimachus, whose tie-breaking vote pushed the Athenians into battle.
Some cite Marathon as the first known example of the pincer maneuver, or what's called a double envelopment. But this isn't truly the case because Miltiades only uses one force, so he does not completely envelop the enemy. The Persians still have an avenue of retreat.
And they use it. The Persians race back toward the beach.
Some say the Athenians immediately chased the Persians back to their ships, but this is pretty unlikely since the Athenians would be completely exhausted at this point.
What likely happened is Miltiades and his men rested until they were able to go back on the offensive.
It took a considerable time for the Persians to try to grab what's left, their wounded, their horses, and put them try to get them on the boats. It might have taken, several hours, 8 to 10 hours. At some point, the Greeks were rested, and at some point, they reformed, and now they began, pursuit is too strong a word, they began literally marching towards the beach in order to encourage, let us say, the Persians to leave.
Fighting breaks out again as the Persian rear guard tries to protect the retreat. Athenians butcher them and capture 7 of the fleeting boats.
Herodotus recounts a story where a Greek soldier grabs a boat with his left hand and has it chopped off by the fleeing Persians. Undaunted, he grabs the boat with his right hand. It also gets chopped off. So the Greek soldier bites the boat and tries to hold it on the beach with his teeth. This is the kind of hyperbole that Herodotus is known for.
The Athenians rout the Persian infantry, But the danger isn't over yet. The Persians aren't sailing back to Asia. They're heading straight for Athens. Miltiades sends a Greek messenger from Marathon to Athens with news of the victory.
The Athenian runs the 26 miles from Marathon to Athens, runs into the town square, yells up his hands, Nike, which means victory, and drops dead, probably of a heart attack or a stroke.
And this is where we get the phrase, to run a marathon. 26 miles, the distance from Marathon to Athens. But at the same time that this inaugural race is being run, Miltiades realizes that the fight is not yet over.
Once Miltiades realizes what the Persians are doing, he sends another runner back to Athens to alert them. Then he assembles his troops for a forced night march back to the city. It's hard to imagine how tired these infantry guys are at this point, but if they hope to save Athens, they have to keep going.
The Athenians march all night long.
It's difficult to know how long it would take the Persian ships to sail to Athens from Marathon, a distance of about 62 miles by sea. While a ship of that day could make the trip in about 10 hours, a lot would depend on the currents, weather condition, weight that the ship was carrying. Also, it's possible that some of the ships with the cavalry might have already sailed for Athens a day or so before. So Miltiades can't be sure if he had won the battle and lost the war.
Early the next morning, the Persian commander Datis enters the Athenian harbor with his 600 ships. On the walls of the city, he sees Miltiades and the entire Athenian army.
Datis takes one look at this, understands the difficulties involved of carrying out an opposed amphibious landing, decides better of it, turns to the coxswain, turn the boat around. The fleet turns around and sails back to Persia. And Athens remains free.
As the Persians sail away, the Athenian infantry can finally celebrate their amazing victory at Marathon. To commemorate the victory, the Athenians build one of the most iconic buildings in human history, the Parthenon, a massive temple to the goddess Athena. Carved into the wall of the Parthenon are 192 figures, one for each of the Athenians slain at Marathon. After the defeat at Marathon, Datis returns to the court of King Darius. Some suggest he's executed for his failure. And while there's no evidence for this, history never hears from Datis again.
But what we do know is that Darius was furious. Furious because this pygmy little barbaric state has insulted the great empire of Persia yet again and got away with it. Darius swears in his mind that if he lives long enough, he will have his revenge on the Athenians. As it turns out, of course, he doesn't live long enough.
Persian revenge for Marathon falls to Darius' son, Xerxes, who 40 years after Marathon personally travels to Greece to fulfill his father's wishes.
This transmission of the desire for revenge against Athens sets up, 40 years later, one of the signature battles of Western military history, the last stand of the 300 at the pass of Thermopylae.
At Thermopylae, the great Spartan commander Leonidas uses the same tactics against the Persians that Miltiades did nearly half a century earlier at Marathon.
Marathon itself is one of those moments that is defining in Western history. In fact, it defines what it is to be Western and Greek over against Persian and Eastern. It's not the end of the story. In fact, it's just the beginning of the story.
The Battle of Marathon tells the ancient world that Persia isn't invincible. It serves as a battle cry for future rebellions throughout the empire. Greece and Persia will continue to clash on and off for the next 100 years. The struggle catapults Greece from obscurity into the center stage of the ancient world. It all begins on the blood-soaked plain of Marathon.